All right, so for our last presentation on the main track today, we have Architecting for Security, the Old Ways with Dan Tentler, or VISS, as he wants to call himself today, from Phobos Security. Take it away.
Thanks. Hey. Hi. I'm glad everybody stuck around. I know it's late in the day. Right. So I'm going to be shouting a lot and waving my arms around, talking about the stuff that we did in 2005, back when I used to ride my Triceratops to work in my loincloth in the Triassic period, before security was an industry that had influencers. So we'll start out with just sort of setting the stage and giving a little bit of intel about like what we see in the field. So in 2021, and this is like semi-old data. I haven't seen the 2022 report from Verizon DBIR. If you can get the Verizon DBIR report, I encourage you to read it. It's full of juicy intel that will tell you all sorts of cool stuff. Like active exploitation, which is like people with hands on keyboard, was the #1 ranked reason for compromise in 2021. And human error-based exposures ranked #2, which basically is like, you messed up a config, or there's something got exposed, or what have you. Like not a CVE, not CVSS, not Dread, not Stride, not MITRE ATT&CK framework, like oops, like oopsie poopsie mode shells. 90% of breaches involve perimeter exposures of some kind, whether it's information gathering or actual shells. So like perimeters matter, right? So the more stuff you find online for a target organization, the easier it is to break into them. Then I got some stats about numbers and money if you're into that sort of thing. Oh yeah, 95% of all breaches create a permanent devaluation of the org stock. That's an important thing to remember. Right, and so this, like back in the day, like Triceratops riding to work mode, we used to put all of our stuff behind firewalls, right? There was like a rack of equipment in a data center, and there was a firewall at the top of the rack, and like it stopped stuff from getting to the sensitive equipment. But that started getting really expensive. Computers started growing and getting gnarly. You started getting blade stuff. This was like late 90s, early 2000s. And people were like, well, that's kind of expensive. Why don't we just like basically take VMware and stick it in the data center and sell VMs to people? Because that's basically what it was. Like for all intents and purposes, it was literally just VMware, like that you were buying a VM from. But then the problem became, well, now we're sort of back to the first issue where now you have a thing that's just directly online, that's not protected by any equipment, and network traffic is hitting the kernel, which is bad. And so, like, right, it was like there was networking equipment, but it was transparent to the user. Like you didn't have access to the switching fabric, you didn't have access to the firewall, you just got like a Linux or a Windows VM on the internet, and you get to deal with it yourself. And you know, so that was like, oh, now the user is stuck doing all the security and the firewalling, and that turned out to be bad. And so cloud vendors at that time, who were a little bit bigger than just VMware that you could rent, decided to chuck like dials and knobs in front of that environment to give users some options besides just like their Windows or Linux host firewalls. And those things tend to be designed by very much not network engineers. And so if you come from a networking background, you spend a lot of time in systems, you're used to seeing a certain type of thing when you log into a firewall. And that's not what you see when you go to any cloud dashboard to do networking. It's disparate, it's convoluted, all the names have been changed to protect the innocent and the derps, and like, it's not easy. Like if you're used to like IP tables or like Checkpoint or pick your firewall vendor, and you go to do firewalling in any cloud environment, it's not that. And so you're gonna be like, well, that's a lot of extra work. I don't know if I wanna deal with it. And so you turn it off. And now we're back to square one, where you have like sensitive equipment, like dev servers and Jenkins and Bamboo and CI/CD and doc servers and file stores and every test server with test.php that's riddled with command execution is just on the internet now. And so here we are again, like history is repeating itself. And so like ordinarily that sort of stuff would have lived behind a firewall. It would have lived behind some kind of choke point, right, if you will, a network and or security choke point that prevents stuff that you don't want from hitting those assets But now it's just out on the internet, and you can touch it, and you can mess with it. So in practically every scenario that I've experienced in my professional career doing this sort of shenanigan, generally, like 9 out of 10 times, the same people that manage the equipment that touches the internet are the same people that manage the equipment behind the perimeter, right? And so it may not be the same human beings, it may not be the same department. Sometimes it's disparate groups, but they all roll up to one leader, generally speaking, and so they all have to play by the same rules. And if you take that into account, if you find trash fires on the WAN, chances are incredibly high you're going to find the same or worse trash fires on the LAN. And so in short, essentially, a company's perimeter is a really good way to fingerprint. It's an indicator of how they manage their internal systems that you can't see. And so if you see stuff on the WAN that's terrible, like for example, if you scan an organization and they're rocking IIS 8.5 on their WAN, or like Tomcat 7 point something's administrative interface that's just exposed, chances are really good that the LAN is worse. And so, because it's the same people that manage all of these systems. So I can't put my finger on why. I would love to understand. But for some reason, like maybe 1 out of 10 organizations that we talk to actually maintain like up-to-date network diagrams of their infrastructure. Like you just don't see pictures of networks anymore. Like I mean, I'm talking even like super simple, like a whiteboard drawing of like this network is connected to that network. I don't know why. I think it's largely because like cloud vendors have made it difficult to get a clear picture of where the equipment is and how one chunk of equipment is related to another chunk of equipment from a networking standpoint. Because like back in the day, you'd say like, it's all of this rolls up to this switch, and that switch talks to that router, and that router goes over our VPN, and then there's this in this office over here, and super simple like this, network diagrams that made life easy. You could say, oh, the traffic has to go this way. I mean, it's like looking at a freeway map. This is where the packets flow, and this is how things interconnect. And so I have a suspicion that that has led to people disregarding networking in its entirety just because it seems to be more convoluted than it could be because of the interfaces that have been made to manage networking in like environments where you don't own the infrastructure or you don't own the network. But that's the thing, that's the catch, is networking is how your app server talks to your DB. Networking is how your customers talk to your app. It's how all the queuing systems behind the scenes work. It's the plumbing of the internet, and it is essentially unavoidable. You have to know at least this much about networking to like function online. And so essentially, you've probably heard a lot of discussion from security people about network segmentation. And these discussions usually involve some kind of breach where an attacker gained access to something and then pivoted or moved laterally, and they were able to freely move about the system or the environment because there was nothing preventing them from doing that. That was the case, I mean, it still is the case, but that was largely what you'd heard several years ago. But now we have that, except it's on the internet, because now there is no firewall. Everything is just public, and so you can just see everything. And so lateral movement is kind of a, not an outdated term, but how do you define lateral movement when everything is just accessible and on the internet anyway? I mean, it's not like they're on a broadcast domain together. It's just a bunch of sequential IPs or what have you. And so these are two pieces of news that came up while I was actually working on this slide deck. This bottom one here is particularly amusing. If anybody remembers the Verkada hack that happened like last year or the year before, an attacker discovered that Verkada had an exposed Jenkins interface that had no credentialing and was able to pivot through that Jenkins interface into a bunch of cameras that Verkada ran, and those cameras were in places like Amazon warehouses, Cloudflare's lobby, SpaceX, one of SpaceX's warehouses where they were building rockets. And it was like those cameras had like, there were third-party managed camera systems, and those cameras phoned home to their mothership, and that attacker was able to ride that access from that popped Jenkins server. I can't even say it was popped. It was just publicly accessible with no credentialing. And then the D&V attack, they didn't release how they got in, but based on like a quick look at the stuff that you can find from them on Shodan, I wouldn't discount the possibility that it was another perimeter-related breach. And so this is just like the two most recent ones. Amusingly, this one, the Commute Air one, same researcher that popped Verkada the same exact way. And so like in a year, even though it was like huge news, Commute Air was compromised because they left a Jenkins server exposed to the internet with no credentialing. And one of the things that was discovered in this breach was the TSA no-fly list. Because part of their CI/CD pipeline involved phoning home to the TSA and grabbing that no-fly list and then putting it on locally and then apparently comparing it to the staff manifest, the crew manifest, to make sure that none of the crew were on the TSA no-fly list. And then they just left it there. And then this 23-year-old kid from Australia found it. And then here we go in the news again. The same exact thing, right? And so marketing works. It works incredibly well. And so like over here, we're spending $22 billion a year on like cryptographic storage and transport stuff. We're over here now with the anti-ODE, like all the ChatGPT stuff is living right here, right? Lots, buckets and buckets and buckets of money. But nobody cares about the perimeter anymore, and nobody cares about basic asset inventory. And so like if you don't know what you have, you don't know what you can defend. And that means I'm going to find it, and it's going to be very colorful. And so it seems to like lean towards, there's this sort of sentiment that like all we care about is the new hot cool cryptographic stuff and the ephemeral stuff that's on the bleeding edge. But like the things that are causing shells, the things that are causing all the breaches are like the 101 level, like don't use default passwords, take stuff off the internet, don't leave test.php with command execution flapping in the wind. And to that end, like the whole prevalence of cloud has exacerbated that problem, because now people think that if you stand up a cloud instance, somehow the sysadmin and the security components are taken care of for you, which is absolutely not the case. Like for example, if you have like a security appliance of some kind that you've put in an environment, whether it's a virtualized appliance or not, and you drop like semicolon reboot into one of the text fields and the thing goes offline, that should be an indicator that like you have just discovered command injection. And if you have command injection on an appliance that's supposed to be a security appliance that's connecting your network to the internet, there's blood in the water at that point. Like that's how Phineas Fisher did the hacking group hack. He did that to, or they did that to SonicWall, I believe. They found an ODE in a SonicWall appliance and then used that as the beachhead for the entire attack, and then pulled the hacking team's network inside out like a gym sock through their security appliance. And if you're willing to go sift through talks online, there was a talk at a conference called 44Con several years ago where a German researcher did the same thing to FireEye's PX appliances that do the email man-in-the-middle deal, where it ended up like using a exploit from 1995, a technique from 1995 to compromise the appliance and then run Python interpreter on it and get root shells from the FireEye appliance. And so what's really interesting is like you see these appliances, if you actually tear off the hood and look underneath, it's like PHP 5, MySQL, Node, grep, sedawk, syslog. It's all the old stuff from 2005. They just put like a saran wrap around it and some spray paint, and they're like, look, it's an appliance. So like perimeter compromise is one of the top 3 ways attackers get in right now today, and it's just going up because there is no perimeter in a lot of cases, or it's just 1,000 machines just online directly connected. And we have, like, for example, a really good jab is like we have the IPv6 version of the ping of death from like the 90s again, because when you put, for example, a Windows box on the internet, the thing that's handling all those network connections, even if the firewall is on, is the kernel. And so if there's a kernel bug, you have that kernel bug directly exposed to the internet, and like stuff will bounce off it or it'll go through it, and it gets colorful very, very fast. So in large part, like breaches can be prevented by just sensible security solutions. You don't have to do super crazy ML, ODE, AI powered. Like it's literally like take the thing off the internet or like light up the firewall. Like I struggle to remember the last time I used an exploit on an assessment. Like it might be 2018, 2019, because we get in everywhere, and the way we get in is somebody forgot something here or there was a bad config here or there was like default creds or something. And it's just becoming more and more prevalent because it's trivial to flip a switch and light up a box on the internet with next to no effort. So cloud was supposed to fix this, but just because you're in the cloud doesn't necessarily mean that you can abandon like sysadmin principles or architecture or your security folks. And if you're in the networking doesn't matter camp, you're going to probably have a rude awakening sometime in the very near future. A box is a box regardless of whether it's virtualized or not. Windows is Windows and Linux is Linux, and they have to be treated appropriately. The fact that they're virtualized doesn't make any difference. Attackers don't care. If they see a vulnerable something or they have an exploit, then they're going to use it, and it doesn't matter what's receiving that exploit, because shells land exactly the same way in containers or VMs or droplets as they do on iron in a data center. So what can we do about it? Well, so the intention here is leading into this is to expose as little as humanly possible. The folks probing your perimeter are scanning and finding things that you probably don't want them to see or know, and you want them to have as little to go on as possible. The less attackers know, the less that they can get you. And if knowledge is power, then you're telling them absolutely everything about you and your environment by having all of your stuff online for them to scan and evaluate and look at. Yeah, they will end up having all the power, and they may actually end up knowing more about your environment than you do. A really fun trick that I like to use is evaluating RDP. If you've never like messed with RDP as a protocol. It's essentially data that's wrapped in regular X509 SSL. And if you run OpenSSL, the command line, or you can use like any one of those SSL scanners, and you aim it at an RDP port, you will get certificate data out of it. And one of the really, really interesting things that I was able to discover was that if you have a Windows computer and it's on a domain, like an Active Directory domain, and it has RDP running, and whoever ran it is not using like Let's Encrypt or any other kind of actual SSL cert, the system generates its own self-signed SSL cert to wrap that RDP data. So if you've ever messed with SSL, or you've ever had to deal with rolling a cert, like when you create a cert, there are certain fields that are required to exist in the cert for it to be valid, and one of them is the issuer. Well, if it's a self-signed cert, then the issuer is itself. And what goes into the issuer field if it's a machine on an Active Directory network? The answer is it's the fully qualified Active Directory domain, like the FQDN of the machine as it exists in Active Directory. And if that machine is interesting and it has a clever name, that's exposed in the cert. Your Active Directory domain, whatever .local, is exposed in the cert. And so I, as an attacker, now know how to log into your Active Directory domain and the name of this machine that's probably hiding behind a firewall where a hole has been poked because it's just blatantly in the cert, and you can just see that because it's connected to the internet. And so like the more you put online, the more attackers can see, and the more attackers can see, the more they get puzzle pieces that they can put together. And the more of those puzzle pieces they put together, the easier it is for them to do whatever it is that they feel like doing. So the theme here today is asset value asymmetry, which I learned about this, like Alex Gantman posted this like last week or something. And the snippet from the paper is from 1999, and it was written by Bruce Schneier and several other people in 1999. And the quote here essentially is, the example is the grocery store shopping carts. They cost $100 to the grocery store, give or take, to purchase. And they keep walking off, right? And so the grocery stores are losing thousands of dollars because their shopping carts are walking away. And that costs the grocery store money. Well, the fix was make them put a pound coin in a machine to get the shopping cart, or use a quarter or something. Like they have to produce a token of some kind to like get the shopping cart. Well, when they did that, like the shopping cart stopped getting stolen. And what that told them was the shopping carts aren't worth 25 cents to the attacker. And so this kind of mind-blowing for me. And I'm like, so the concept of the asset value asymmetry, it's worth $100. You know, these shopping carts are worth $100 to the organization that has to buy them, but they're not even worth a quarter to the thieves. And so conceptually, you're in a position to drop a $500,000 Palo Alto firewall in front of a network. You shouldn't assume that that buys you $500,000 of defense, because you spending $500K on a thing to defend a network does not necessarily equate to you imposing $500,000 of work on the attacker. And there you go with your dichotomy there. It doesn't make it safe if you bought another appliance that's just running kernel 2.4 under the hood, sitting next to PHP 5. It'll make the compliance paperwork look great, but it's actually adding attack surface that your attackers can then use. And so making it expensive for attackers has next to nothing to do with your defensive spending. Look at Sony Pictures, look at Verkada, look at Okta. Making life harder for attackers is more like thinking like Bowser from Mario Brothers. So like your Bowser, you have a castle and Mario's coming, and your job is to make it as difficult as you possibly can for Mario, because he's coming and he's got mushrooms and they're not for you. So we'll begin with some architecture with regards to like pushing code out to boxes, right? So a lot of people are using things like CF Engine, Chef, Puppet, Ansible, these sorts of technologies to like push data or configs or apps or what have you out to like a fleet of servers. And there is always this choice that somebody has to ask at some point: do you do push or pull? Do you have the workers pull from a central host, or do you push from one central place to all the workers? So if you're pushing, all of those nodes in almost every circumstance are going to have some port open to receive that push. Usually it's SSH, right? And so if you have a whole bunch of these workers out in the world listening on SSH, and you have one like source of truth that's pushing data, then I as an attacker only need to get one SSH key. And if I get that one SSH key, I own your whole fleet. because generally speaking, these are boxes that are just out on the internet, no firewall, no ACLs, nothing preventing me from just getting in there and looting the place. And it is a little bit of extra work. If you flip that over on its head and you do a pull configuration, you can set up pull and have 0 open ports on all these worker nodes. Even if they're directly connected to the internet and re-architecting it to prevent them from touching the internet is like out of the question or can't be worked or what have you, you can improve your posture by saying one less port open on the internet means one less opportunity for bad guy to do bad guy things. And so like in that caveat there, you're going to have secrets to handle this environment. And in almost every circumstance, there's going to be like 1 or 2 people or a small team that has access to the super secret keys that control everything. And understanding that that's how these things behave. Wow, look at that. Basically, the attackers will just compromise the people that hold the keys and ride those people's access into the environment. And so there's a lot to be said about like the handling of secrets and the handling of keys and keeping them out of the hands of attackers. Which is a little further than just like hiding them inside GitHub or hiding them inside like AWS or what have you. There's a large discussion around like an out-of-band tool that pushes the keys where they need to go after this deployment process happens, so the deployment process never ever exposes any of the secrets or like API keys or what have you to any of the people that are even working on the code. They don't need to see them at all. You can do it out of band after the fact. So fail to ban is fantastic. If any of you have ever heard of it or used it, fail to ban is a tool that basically listens to text files. It like reads logs. Upon initial installation, it focuses almost entirely on almost entirely on just SSH. But you can extend it to do essentially whatever you want. And the way that it works is it reads text files and it looks for patterns. And when a pattern is found, it executes a command. And those default commands are IP tables commands because by default, essentially what it does is it watches several common services. And if it detects shenanigans, like people, for example, trying to brute force SSH, it will then drop a IP tables firewall rule into that host and block that host at the kernel level. And so that host can't even open sockets to talk to that machine anymore. As it turns out, you can do a lot more interesting stuff. You can have it read from other different logs and trigger on other different things. If you use this correctly, you end up in this sort of scenario where you have like a Hellraiser-esque style like torture chamber of goodies that you can use against attackers that are going after your equipment. You just have to decide what the thresholds are and how you want to trigger things. So fail to ban ultra mode. If you find yourself in a position where you have like dozens or hundreds or thousands of hosts out on the internet and they're all listening on public IPs and they're exposed the way I was describing earlier, and you light all those up with fail to ban, suddenly you're going to start getting this huge inrush of like bogus traffic, like brute forcing of all sorts of different techniques and all sorts of craziness. And all that craziness, if you use something like syslog, will get shunted into one place. And now you have like your own like baby food version of like Cloudflare or Proofpoint, where now you have like several hundred nodes that are collecting bad stuff and tunneling it into one place, and then you can review all that bad stuff and you can take actions against it. Like for example, if you have one host that's getting pummeled by an IP and that log lands in one central place and you're running fail to ban in that central place, then you can say the action becomes null route traffic from that IP to everywhere else. And so you basically have like a honeypot-esque kind of thing going on without intentionally deploying a honeypot, because you're just taking logs and looking at the logs for bad stuff and then taking an action on that bad stuff. And so Apache rewrite rules are kind of similar if you've ever played with this sort of stuff. Apache rewrite rules are like regex except for web requests. Essentially, you can make decisions based on a bunch of different source information that comes in, like source IP, DNS names, ports, file names, cookies, refers, custom fields, essentially anything you can do with regular expressions. And you can stack that on top of fail to ban to say, for example, if fail to ban discovers that, for example, a really good use case is you have a web service, it's exposed to the internet, and it's getting pummeled by somebody hitting it with like a directory brute forcer. So directory brute force is going to cause thousands and thousands of 404 messages. And so if you look at the log and you can see one IP address is generating like megs or gigs of logs of 404s, you can create a fail to ban rule that simply says, if an IP 404 is more than 30 times in 10 seconds, run this script. And what that script can do is say, add this IP address to a text file, and that text file is referenced by Apache, which in the rewrite rules essentially says, for every IP in this list, rewrite where they're going to this Rick Astley video, or to this giant mammoth blob that's 10 gigs of just junk data, or something. And now what you're doing is adversarial defense. What you're doing now is you're messing with the attacker. Because the attacker's tool set in almost every circumstance is someone else's hacked box. And so, like, how can you tell that person that their box got hacked? You fill the disk, and then the box stops working, and they have to figure out why it stopped working. And they'll go investigate. Oh, the disk is full. Why is the disk full? Oh, there's a 100 gig text file. What on earth? And then they have to investigate that. And when they find that, they realize, oh, here's some dot directory that an attacker created. This server's been compromised, and one of the hosts that they tried to SSH brute force filled the disk with a bunch of junk. And so now you have, without destroying data or formatting anything or involving law enforcement, told somebody that otherwise didn't care about security that maybe they should start. And so this is shenanigans that I highly encourage, right? And so you can do all sorts of other stuff, right? You don't like search engines? Mess with them. Have them serve different data. You don't like the red team? If you figure out where the red team is coming from, do the same thing. You know where the red team's attacking you from? Apache rewrite them to something else. You're the blue team, and you want to mess with the red team? Ha 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 ha. Figure out, figure out the other way. If you're the red team and the blue team is coming after your C2, if you know what the WAN IP address is of the blue team, you can do the same thing. If the blue team starts scanning you, they get like a clean, like, default Apache install page, or they get like hi blue team or something like that, but they don't get to your C2. They don't get to any of the backend stuff. Same thing, like somebody fails SSH too many times, you can redirect them to a thing I learned about a few days ago called endless SSH. Endless SSH is an SSH server that just dumps dev random to the console. And so, yes, and so if some attacker is like connecting to your server and trying to scrape the banner, they're going to get just literally an endless barrage of junk data, and that's going to ruin their scrapers, because these people that write the code for the attack end of things are not ninja developers. They're not SDLC gods. They don't do this stuff for a living. They write super janky sticks and spit and baling wire code that just barely functions because it's somebody else's hacked server they're running it on. Their resources are limited. And so they basically light the stuff up. It's usually like a PHP script or a Python script, and it does its thing, and it creates a bunch of vulnerable IPs that they then go do other stuff on. But so you're taking the ground away from them. You're pulling the rug out from under their feet. If you wreck their infra while they're trying to scan you, and it's going to mess up their day, and that tickles me. Oh, there was this whole other thing about like, oh, can you scroll to the bottom of the notes for me? Yeah, there you go. It works in, where is it here? There you go. You figure out your customers' WAN IP addresses, make sure their blue team comes to investigate your box. All the web requests land on a website selling mustache wax or instructions on how to reinstall eggs back into chickens. So yeah, have some fun with it, right? And if you think rewrite rules are cool, you're really going to dig this, right? So HA proxy, if you've ever heard of HA proxy, it can do some light protocol analysis as well. And so you can stack this in front of Apache, and you can say, for example, if the packets coming in on port 443 match this mask, if it has these bytes at the front, it's SSH, and then use this back. So with HA proxy, the config file has like back ends and front ends. And then the front end, you listen on ports, and on the back end, you tell it where to send the traffic. And so if you, on the front end, detect this is actually SSH, you can then aim that at the back end of an SSH server. But if the traffic comes in and it's SSL, send that to Apache, where all your fun rewrite stuff lives. And so you can run a box on the internet with a single port open with just 443, and you can listen on SSH on that port, and to this is a fun thing, this is what we were doing for a while on the red team side of the house, is you can create red herrings for the blue team if they're coming after you, if you know what their source IP address is or what their user agents are, the browsers they're hitting you with. And on the Apache side of things, you can do like URI routing. And so, for example, like a lot of these C2 pieces of software will operate over HTTP or HTTPS, and you can then create like arbitrary fake directories. Like you can create a URI, and the URI can be like /Metasploit, /Mythic, /Cobalt Strike, /Sliver, /Merlin, whatever. Pick your C2, right? There's a dozen of these things. And so you can say, all the shells phone home to the same IP on the same port. That's wrapped in SSL, so the blue team can't see that part. But as soon as that SSL gets terminated on the HA proxy and the path is exposed, you can then decide where that traffic goes based on the path, and you can use Apache and rewrite rules, reverse proxying to do that as well. And I call this system the firewall. It's like a firewall, but worse. But yeah, and so like if the blue team scans you or a browser scans you or what have you, then it's going to land on HA proxy and it's going to get whatever you want the public to see, which is your mustache wash or your like reinstalling eggs into chickens thing. So you can script or architect yourself out of a job with just these components. I mean, there's a whole lot more. I could go on for quite a long time until you stuff a sock in my mouth, but there's a lot here, and this is hopefully just a thread you can tug on to get you some more intel. You can deploy entire systems. You can, for example, there's a really fun story. A million years ago, back in the Triceratops days, I used to work for an anonymizer, and one of the things I got to manage was the CF Engine architecture where, this is like 2005, this is before Chef and Puppet, but like we were pushing configs to servers in a data center using CF Engine, and one of the things that CF Engine did really well, which I found endlessly amusing, is it will, you can tell it what to do if it detects file system changes. So if your server gets compromised and attackers are dumping stuff into temp directories or like writing stuff out to somewhere that's compromised or what have you, CF Engine runs every minute out of cron. And they have 60 seconds to do whatever they're going to do. Because in 60 seconds, cron's going to run, it's going to trigger a CF Engine. Well, CF Engine sees a bunch of file system changes, that's bad, and just pushes all the new configs back down, which wipes absolutely everything. And so it was hilarious sitting there watching attackers log in, dump stuff, get stomped by CF Engine, and then start again. And we'd see how many times they would try before they gave up. And so now you're like, it's kind of like messing with the phone scammers that call you. You try and take as much of their time as you can so they don't mess with other people. You're doing the same thing with attackers, right? So you're taking their time, you're making them frustrated, you're imposing costs. And all of this is free. Like you don't need a $500,000 appliance to do this. It's literally just 15 minutes and like harmless but semi-malicious intentions towards attackers, right? You're not dropping malware, you're not formatting boxes, you're not causing any destruction, but you're giving some guy in another country a really hard time, and it's really good fun. Like for example, you can say, I can trigger a script that rewrites the HA proxy config based on what happens in the failed to ban logs. You can do what I call bear trapping Linux servers, which I'll get into in a moment. But you can say, like, you can pull the shell out from under people. It's good fun. I highly encourage it, right? So bear trapping Linux boxes is like a whole other rabbit hole we could totally go into if I had more time. Honey tokens, if you've ever heard of those things are fantastic. You can change somebody's shell to a shell script. Like instead of getting bin bash, they get like /temp/lol.sh, and lol.sh just does curl-s parrot.lol. If you've never done that, I encourage you to, because it's amazing. It just displays a text like ASCII art of that dancing parrot forever until you Control-C, which is also great to fill somebody's disk if they try and, yeah, it's so good. And then, okay, so there's another tool called Byobu, which is similar to Tmux and Screen. It's like that, but with lots of bells and whistles and colors. You can make somebody's terminal Byobu. And so if an attacker gets into that terminal, you can live watch them as though you're watching like a show. You can watch them type in commands and get frustrated. People have made honeypots and Unix jails where they just make essentially like a Twitch stream out of attackers trying to get into equipment and then watching them get frustrated and quit and leave. You can install malicious SSH credentials that steal the credentials, or you can install a malicious SSH server that when they connect, it steals the credentials and the keys they're trying to use to authenticate. You can, using the previous diagram, say all SSH lands into a VM running an ancient version of Solaris, but on the front end, the web server says it's IIS 6. And so, like, confuse them, give them a hard time. Don't make it easy for them, right? Or apt-get install endless.sh, which is, I think I mentioned it already, it's an SSH server that just dumps random garbage to the terminal, and so it's going to fill the attacker's disk. Centralized logging, this is not a new concept. You can pay thousands, tens of thousands of dollars to many organizations that will do collection of your logs and give you like a front end to use to review those logs. There's a dozen of these places. There's also Splunk if you're willing to pay $10,000 for more than a gig a day of logs, which is insane. But under the hood, all this stuff tends to run essentially syslog. And so if you're willing to stand up a syslog server on your own, you can combine it with all these other technologies I mentioned, where now you have all of these things happening on all of these boxes where attackers are doing all of this stuff, and all the logs land in one place. And if all the logs land in one place, you can dramatically improve what I call your swordsmanship with slicing and dicing text files, grep, sed, awk, command line stuff at the Linux end of things, to find really interesting tidbits and patterns and whatnot. And as you do that, as you get better reviewing text log files in their enormity, you can then take those nuggets of intel you can pull out of those logs, and you can shove them back into this machine you've now created, this firewall, where you have like, oh, if they're doing this and this and that, or they're hitting me with these user agents or whatever, you can then add those to your tooling to then have your front end behave differently and troll the attackers in other different colorful ways. And the more you do that, you get really, really good at command line stuff. It's all just pipes and pipes and pipes. And this really fun command down here is a really good example of like, you want a SIM and you don't want to deal with installing a SIM, or you don't want to pay anybody a thing. Here's literally a bash one-liner. This tails a log file, pipes a result to awk. Awk looks for pattern, and if pattern is seen, it runs a command. And so like if you're on a Mac, for example, or you can do this on Windows too, I'm pretty sure, you can like make it say things. You can just type say and then something, and it'll shout at you. And so you can just have it like read a log, and if it sees a certain line, you can have it say something. Super simple, super down to earth, single line of bash. You can deploy it if you're doing incident response instantly. You don't have to wait for licensing. There's no purchase orders. It's dead simple. And a lot of the stuff that you're using that is expensive and stuff runs this stuff under the hood. And so again, I encourage you to like get elbow deep, start messing with this stuff, because you can be incredibly powerful with it, because this is the technology upon which things like FireEye was built. It's all this under the hood. And so on the other side of the house, if you want to hide stuff, if you want to be the attacker, there's like this dash operator in bash you can use. And the dash operator tells the command to handle escapes differently. And so in this case, what I've done is I've made a directory that's name is a period and then a space. And then so if you do an ls, you just see like another dot directory, and it's totally innocuous. And if you want to be even more shady, you can mount an ISO or a zip over that directory. And so now you have like, you can have it's like a drawer. You can have stuff in that dot directory, and then you can hide it by mounting something over it. And so if you're not familiar with like Linux fundamentals, and you don't know how to look at mounts, and you don't know how to like find this stuff, then it's going to be invisible, and any EDR is going to flow over it and not see what's underneath it. Another fun trick is to change the dates of your files to a year ago, because a lot of searches happen for like the most recent file changes. So you change the date. And this is all like one-liners in bash and Linux fundamental stuff. And to find stuff, you can do it the other way around, right? You can say, I'm going to make the user shell a Byobu window, and that Byobu window is going to log to a file that is actually a symlink, and the file that's being logged to is write-only and out of control of the end user. And so they can't, even if they know what it is, like their permissions won't let them delete the file, or even if they notice that it's a symlink. And so there's ways you can say, basically, the attacker lands in a little box that we control, and now it's a television show, because now we're all watching. They're in Byobu, and you can attach multiple sessions to that and watch people stumbling around trying to do stuff. You can find files that match a certain date, or that are owned by a specific user, or were created a certain way. You can mess with, you can change the permissions of the mount command and decide who can mount what. And chrootkit and rkhunter are fantastic for finding stuff that's not supposed to be there, because they've been doing that for quite a long time. But again, they're just command line tools that are available on the Linux box. These things are free. They've been around for quite a long time, and it seems that people have forgotten they exist. And so all of this stuff stacks like Devo hats. For example, you can have like a server with only port 443 open that bear traps SSH inbound unless you use the right key. You can trigger like a reverse port scan on a host that's hitting you if it causes failed demand fire. Combine logs from 5,000 machines and have your own little personal threat intel feed. Like, it's all mix and match. You can use the stuff however you'd like. And to that end, if you're using syslog to imbibe that stuff, then all sorts of stuff talks syslog. Your badge readers talk syslog, your firewalls talk syslog, UPSs, storage arrays, everything. If it's got Linux running under the hood, it can be made to talk syslog. And so you can collect logs from all sorts of interesting stuff. Like, for example, a really good thing that I like to advocate is if you can get the logs from your badge readers, you can see, oh, there's this person who's trying to badge in, but our calendaring system says they're on vacation in Bali. What is their badge doing at the front door? And then so cameras, security, that sort of thing. And it's literally just correlating events together that, like, if a human being looks at this stuff, you're like, oh, this is simple to understand. It's really straightforward. But as far as the computers go, it may not be quite as straightforward, especially if you're dealing with like a dashboard that has taken the stuff that we've been doing for 20, 25, 30 years and convoluted it by changing all the names and moving everything everywhere, and now it's impossible to see or do stuff with. And so if you know how this stuff runs under the hood, it'll make you kind of a god. And so like stuff to get you started, really easy things. Change the name of your server string to fake BS that's not actually what it's running, because that's how servers get fingerprinted. It's the honor system. If an attacker asks your web server, what version of web server are you, and you lie, they don't know that, so lie. Like, you're gonna get scanned. You're just gonna. Like, if you want to test it, light up an Azure instance and just TCP dump and watch. Even worse, if you light up a sensitive port, light up port 445 on a Linux box and watch what comes in. What was it like? The last time I read about it or heard about it, the life expectancy for a Windows XP workstation that was unpatched on the internet was something on the order of 30 seconds before it was compromised. And so if you have something on the internet, it's gonna get hit with that internet background radiation. Expect it, and you're gonna have to do something about it, right? Expose only the absolute bare minimum you need. I don't want to see dev servers or test servers or QA servers or build servers or Jenkins. Like, I should never see any of this stuff online. Put it behind a VPN. I'm sure that there's an excuse. I don't care what the excuse is. Hide it, because if I can see it, I'm gonna turn it into this. The more I can see, the more I can learn about you. Again, like with the RDP trick, I can learn about your domain. I can learn about internal DNS addresses. If you're putting internal RFC 1918 addresses in your public DNS, I can brute force for that. Like, the more I know about your infrastructure before I go in, the more I know about what I can do when I land and do stuff after that, right? If you tell me everything via your perimeter, you're just going to be the next Colonial Pipeline, Verkada, Okta, Commute Air, T-Mobile, right? And so don't let knowledge is power, right? So stop giving knowledge to the attackers. Hide everything. Don't let people see stuff. Don't put test, dev, all that stuff on the internet. Hide it. Just don't let it get scanned. Don't let it get indexed by Google. Don't let it get indexed by ChatGPT, right? Thanks. I appreciate you giving me the time to come up here and make an ass out of myself. And I know it's the end of the day and we're way, way, way over. And so please enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks again.